Awesome. Thanks. So I have the pleasure of moderating this panel. The title is the future of DAOs, why decentralized structures will shape the future. So I'm Jorge, working on growth at SAFE, and I'd love to give our panelists a moment to introduce themselves. So Ruka, take it away.
Hi everyone. First of all, thanks for the invitation. My name is Ruka. I'm head of growth for Kapatki. Kapatki is a DAO treasury management DAO itself that really was spun off, Gnosis DAO. And I had my background on Web2. I was a founder of a payments processing startup back in the day, so I may be the noob in-house. So really just got into Web3 full-time a year ago. Super interested in DAOs as a new organizational primitives, and yeah.
Hi, I'm Reka. I'm the founder of Guild XYZ. We build an infrastructure for access management, and I'm super interested in social networks and the relationships formed around those social algorithms that we use in these applications today. And generally just building organizations and communities has been my focus for the recent years, so thanks for having me.
I think that still works. Yeah. I did just like 20 minutes introduction, so maybe just interesting to SAFE, obviously, as a smart contract account, is used by a lot of DAOs. So that's one connection we have to DAOs, like a lot of treasuries. Our treasuries run on SAFEs. And on the other side, SAFE also just DAOified itself because we're like a core protocol for Ethereum. We also want to have the governance be decentralized. So having also this interest from being a DAO ourselves.
Yeah. So as these introductions, were being covered, I think the word DAO is thrown around a lot, and it's become kind of, a buzzword in some sense. There's a lot of promises that go along with that word. I guess open question, how would you define a DAO? Maybe what it is and what it isn't in your mind? I think that's a good starting point, if anybody wants to take that.
I can start. The way I see this, the way I see DAOs are basically digital native organizations that take decisions based upon capital incentives, so to speak, so voting power. What they aren't, I'd say, are basically, or they don't pretend to be, and we can later go specifically on that, is they're not definitely top-down decision-based organisms. They actually intend to be the opposite, and I think the reason for that is twofold, in my opinion. One is that they kind of design open source systems that are made to persist the test of time, and in order for that to occur, they really have to be organized in ways in which they cannot be attacked, so to speak. So that's the way I see that.
I always have trouble of deciding where is the line between an internet community, a tokenized community, and a DAO. And I think still the one difference than the previous to a DAO is the decentralization, and kind of to go off of what Luke was saying is the bottom-up approach, and still having a lot of the power in the hands of the community, and especially in governance. And whenever I'm talking about DAOs, the governance question always comes up, and I was thinking about why we always talk about governance, and I think maybe because that's the differentiating factor, is that tokenized communities are kind of a prerequisite to DAOs, and DAOs are more mature in their decision-making processes, as we like to see. So I'm very critical about what we call DAOs right now are not really DAOs, but tokenized communities. So yeah, we have some growing to do, and DAOs are still super interesting and a good goal to go towards.
Now maybe do the broadest definition of DAOs, which is really on-chain coordination. And this can be as simple as just a group of friends coming together and having a multi-sig and coordinate around assets, data, stuff like that together. But it can be also as big as having this shared purpose, this shared mission being more on like kind of common welfare or like coordinating a public good, which then makes them look more like a nation state type organization. And usually what's in between, what also maybe most people define as DAOs, is more if this shared purpose is profit driven, and then it's more like a company, like an internet native company. But I think as kind of on-chain coordination around the shared purpose is probably the kind of widest definition I would take.
Yeah, purpose is a really interesting point. I wonder what you think would align people on a common goal to scale up from what we've seen now on smaller organizations up to like a meaningful, whether it's a nation state or larger group of people. Like what do we think is needed to align both like purpose, goal, incentives to get people bought into that vision of saying like, hey, I belong to something that is bigger than just this profit-seeking organization or this nonprofit or something, and move beyond to potentially having like real world or nation state level impact. I wonder if anybody has ideas on what needs to happen to kind of get to that scale.
This is a super interesting topic, and it kind of goes into more of the mission of DAOs and why this whole, these types of organization exists. And this, I think maybe we could play around with the ideas of how DAOs will affect how the IRL or the non-digital governance mechanisms are going on today. And I think it's I'm trying to be optimistic, but I think the technology will be adopted in a really long time. But maybe some ideas around information sourcing, so for surfacing data from most of the community, most of the organization into what they like to see happen and come to life is super interesting, which I think a lot of more traditional organizations should adopt. But on the other hand, I think we could still learn so much from those gigantic organizations that are running Web2 right now. I had the pleasure of talking to a few of these masterminds who've been doing this for 30 years in their career, and I thought to myself, okay, I can learn everything on the internet and we can find a lot of things out on our own, but there's a lot of things that are actually done pretty well and at least have some seasoning. We could just make it way better with our technology that we develop in Web3. So probably a mixture of those two, of the new tech that we develop and the experience that Web2 already has with running this.
To that point, I also think that like we're always trying to reinvent the wheel in many places. Everyone is just lazy and is not taking the time to really go back and see like what is really corporate governance, what is nation state governance, and what can we actually learn from like hundreds of years of experience there. And that's also why we have like a lot of DAOs just being inefficient, because they have all decisions being done at the top level, and then like have every little grant that needs to be paid out needs to go through the entire kind of community to decide on. And there we have established patterns that we can learn from, where like delegating responsibility, having checks and balances and so on, that work in corporations, that work in nation state governance. Not everything is perfect there, but we also like, I'd rather be us, like DAOs, be iteratively better than we have today, rather than what we have right now, which is really worse than other examples.
Yeah, to your point as well, like I really see this pattern kind of repeating itself, where we go through this period of disruption where we're definitely on denial of the status quo just because we decide that that was the wrong way to do things. So we initiate this experimentation period where we try to do very weird stuff on an iterative model, and then we fuck up a lot of times, but that's part of the learning process. And then we eventually go back and start to see how these problems were being solved like 500 years ago, and we come up on, we come more to the middle, and then that's where we really start to see progress. So I think we're still on a phase where we're in denial of what's there, and we're experimenting with new technologies. I think, more and more, and especially I think we're going to emerge from this bear market with the necessity to kind of put put our feet back into earth again and really look into reality and really come down to, okay, what are the right applications for these new technologies that we have? And then in the future, the reason why I got into DAOs, and this really excites me, is that I think we're kind of paving the way for, changing the way, for instance, nation states are governed, in 20 years' time. And that's what excites me the most, like starting from really small ecosystems, getting acquaintance with kind of the challenge that we're going to face in order for us to accomplish and to scale, and eventually get to a scale where, okay, now it's manageable for us to kind of govern entire nation states using this technology that we created.
And for adoption, I guess I have two questions. One that comes more from the top, one from the bottom. Ruka, I'll start with you. On the large scale for adoption at the enterprise, nation state, or just higher level of organization, what is needed, or what are you most excited about in terms of, treasury management is probably most relevant to Kropotki, but I'm curious what you're keeping an eye on and what you're excited about.
Yeah, for me, treasury management is an example of what Lukas was mentioning around delegating power. I think, again, to the point where we just try to spin the whole ecosystem towards an end where everybody should decide on everything. I think we'll eventually going to meet in the middle of where we decide and we acknowledge that, okay, there's, a scope of decisions that, given their technical nature, aren't feasible to be decided on a community level. Okay, so there's asymmetry of information in every organization, and that only creates the environment for bad decisions to be created, just because the majority of the voting power likes the necessary information to come up with the best decision. So for me, what I'm most concerned about is to create systems that allow for the entire community to have access to the right information. Actually, it's one of the reasons why I have difficulties, accepting the way democracy is being implemented right now, is that, we have one-for-one vote schemes where definitely the breadth of knowledge isn't distributed equally, okay? So I'm really interested in ways in which we can improve the distribution of information equally, and examples of those would be kind of new front ends for, permissionless access, where people would get exactly the right information for them to come up with a decision. With that being said, obviously, those front ends would have to be themselves decentralized, otherwise they could be kind of used for the power of the few, kind of, biasing information or whatnot, making people kind of make decisions that are not accurate. So yeah, super excited to see, new front ends being developed.
Yeah, and Reka, for the other side, I think we've been talking about identity a lot, and social, how these understandings of individual identity, sovereignty tie into participation and belonging in these DAOs and emerging organizations. What are you excited about on the individual and personal side as it relates to participation on the larger scale?
I think what has been really interesting to see is how we scale the value of the groups and kind of the relationships within the groups. Another word for this is intimacy, of when you grow a group from 5 to 500, it kind of becomes from a group chat where everybody voices their opinions, trust and know each other, and actually dare to say if they disagree with something, into kind of a megaphone situation where you just scream, where the people who are more confident about their ways, they just put out their ideas and somebody reacts, maybe nobody reacts to that opinion. So I'm very interested in how we're going to fix this, and I think partially, to the best of my knowledge right now, granularity will be the solution for the next year for us on this, which can be managed by having different roles per individual. So the organization can be as big as you need it to be, but when people have specific roles, and kind of what you were saying too, that everybody who's participating gets their relevant information based on who they are, what reputation they have, what experience they have, what journey they've been through already on the internet, and kind of what requirements they already satisfied in their internet journey, to be at that point, to be participating in this channel right now and see this server, see this group, see this governance proposal. I think that's going to solve a lot of these problems, and still every individual can still participate in the larger organization, but within their own respective areas of expertise or experience or interest. And I think that's going to be beautiful to see. So I think there's still a lot to do in how we moderate these groups, how we think about individual identity and group identity and how they relate to each other, so that we can give relevant information and provide these good point to focus on for the next few years to be able to scale communities to be functioning well and make decisions and work together better.
Do you have any examples of communities that have done a really good job at fostering intimacy? I think that's a really good way to put it, and I hadn't thought about it that way, but can you point the audience maybe to where to look for an example?
My best advice for finding these is following your authenticity and interest. So I can name a few groups that I'm part of right now that are still small or getting bigger, but intimacy is scaled best because people like myself just randomly found this group through my own social network. So like my friend put in there, like, Reka, you'd love this group. And I'm like, hell yeah, I love it. Because I've been in there. So I don't want to influence your journey. So I feel like if you're active on Twitter and or Telegram, trust your social network in a sense of ask them what groups they're part of and what they find is interesting, so that people who are already your niche, you're friends with, you have some sort of gravity together, trust their judgment. I think that's going to lead you to interesting spaces. Right now, what I like to just name drop, which might be interesting, I'm part of a group called UTC24, which just means kind of that we're all over the world, everybody's remote from different spaces. And in that little group, I was onboarded with a call. My friend put me in there, which a call was super interesting for onboarding because I could give feedback on the onboarding, like what information I'm not getting, like I don't know what's going on here, or I exactly purposefully know what's going on here. And we use threads really well, so there's a lot of little projects going on within this community, but I only have to check the ones that I'm relevant to. So there's a lot of things going on, but I know exactly the 2 tabs that I have to keep checking to keep me updated. So that's a really well-run community. It's pretty small, very curated, but it's really well-run. It's a pleasure to be there.
Cool. On the topic, moving to kind of future threats or what might pose risks to DAOs in the near future, Lukas, you had mentioned some of the questions or considerations that SafeDAO took in the spinoff and some of the structural and legal implications that had to be taken into consideration. To start off, but we'll open it up, what do you think some of those big risks that you're keeping an eye on and that DAOs should be aware of might be?
And I think many are not aware of that really right now, is that if you just have a group of people come together, whether it's 5 or 100 people, and you have like a DAO, and you don't really have to find the legal structure of the DAO, so you don't wrap it into like a legal entity, then there is a real risk that some jurisdiction says this is like a general partnership. And what this means is that each and every one of the individuals is actually liable for what the DAO in its entirety is doing. We had also an example from Orchid DAO where the CFTC actually took this stance and also made actually individual people participating in the governance process liable. And I think that's just something where DAOs need to take a stance on. Do they want to take this legal approach and say we just risk it in a way, or we make it as hard as possible for this to be considered a general partnership, or we're just all anonymous? Or we're actually leaning in and saying, okay, we're incorporating this. There's like different models in Wyoming, in Switzerland, in Cayman, how this can be done. And we have legal certainty, and we take the drawbacks of that, but at least we can then have like a real-world proxy entity that represents the DAO and that can also protect its participants. It is like an umbrella that's protecting also the participants then in the DAO from like regulators coming at the individuals for whatever reason. And the risk there is that the more exposed you are, or the kind of lower hanging fruit you are, the more risk you have. So obviously if you're not a public figure, the risk of some regulator saying you're responsible for whatever the DAO does is quite small. But if you're considered like a head of a project, or you're considered like a very public figure representing the DAO, you should really kind of be aware at least of that risk and see how we want to take that.
Can I ask? And then the DAO chooses, or the community chooses, who's going to be the one who takes the responsibility, or is there like a volunteer system of like there's one person or two people that we appoint as kind of the responsible people for this legal structure that can be, held responsible for anything that the DAO is doing, or do you know how that works?
It really depends on the entity that's used. There's entities which are really just like purpose-driven entities, so they say like even the people that are then part of this entity, they don't have a free choice what can be done, or like how this DAO is being represented, so they're always purpose-driven by the DAO. Something that we've done in SafeDAO, so we have a Swiss foundation that's the legal wrapper for SafeDAO, and as part of this we can actually have, as an internal body of the DAO, we can have people that are elected by the community as representative be kind of under this security protection of the foundation. So they're really they're not kind of representing themselves as an individual, but they're part of this legal wrapper. And this way you can structure like sub-DAOs or subcommittees that can make decisions, and you don't kind of outsource just the responsibility to these people or to just one person in the legal entity, but you can have also the protection in a more broad way.
Can I add something? Okay. On that topic still, so you've mentioned that some people might be elected for, representing, the legal or real world kind of wrapper, the proxy of the DAO. How are currently being incentivized? Are they currently being incentivized? And the reason I'm asking this is because, like, one of the reasons why, in my opinion, DAOs are interesting is because of their permissionless nature, right? But we're going through a phase where there's a lot of apathy just because, the costs of entrance on specific DAOs are really low. So there's there's no reason why I shouldn't be participating in 100 DAOs at the same time and contributing, but I'm just only one person, right? So, 24 hours a day and not more, my life can stretch that much. So are those people, and obviously there's the other spectrum, which, okay, if you want to incentivize properly that people are going basically to take or to stick their necks out, do we face the challenge of having them kind of going through this inequality, value distribution through the DAO just because there's more people that, have, more risks involved, you know what I mean? Like, there's a specific balance between each one of these spectrums where, yes, we want to have like, power distributed as much as we can, but on the other hand, like, we want people still incentivized to do proper work every day. How do you find the balance?
We will definitely go in that direction, that people need to really focus on have one DAO. It's not like if they want to be delegate in kind of representing the voice of many people, which many DAOs implement the way that you have like delegates, they represent the people. But if you're then delegate in 50 different DAOs, how can you really build up that expertise that you're kind of representing your backers, like your delegatees in all of them, if you're spending 5 minutes per week kind of following what's going on. So there definitely we need also better incentivations for people to say, I really make this my job, let's say, to represent the interests of a subgroup, of a community, and then we have, like, makers started doing that more or less successfully, that they actually pay delegates and they're incentivized, and this also allows them to really remove themselves out of their other obligations, whether it's like a Web2 job or something, and say, like, I'm now contributing to this DAO and I'm taking that responsibility. And like, you can call this like govern to earn, or like, but these systems will probably have to evolve, because right now it's just a few very excited people who were taking all that responsibility, but there's not really a way how they can also like sustain themselves.
Thanks. Any other thoughts on future risks? No? Okay. Black mirror territory. Any new technology has the opportunity to unlock like new forms of connecting, operating, like a lot of cool and positive things can come out. What are some of the potential negatives or like scary DAO paths that we can go down in the near future that you're thinking about, or are potential risks?
What's most scary to me, and what we talk about most often these days, is the identity piece, but regarding that, the reputation. There's a lot of different projects that approach this from different angles. None of them are wrong, essentially, but what I would be very wary of is Black Mirror vibes, is making reputation a number. So like, it's okay if it's like a bunch of badges and, the protocol or community can decide what badges they take as a valid source of information about this person. But actually putting numbers with reputation is so scary. I don't know if you've seen that episode in Black Mirror where they rank each human interaction that they just did, like with the postman to the government official, with the person who sells you the coffee. It's so scary because numbers can go down and go up really fast, and it's not a very multidimensional picture about that person, and it can be very, very dangerous to go in that territory. So I would stay very away from that. We're multidimensional beings, and numbers extremely reduce that and add a lot of risk, which I would not like to see.
But on the other hand, if we don't solve this identity challenge, we face a potential scenario where civil attacks could occur, and we could have single entities gathering excess power throughout a specific line of DAOs and creating or distorting the incentives for them to start making decisions for their own sake instead of for the communities. So I really see, yes, identity has that specific challenge, and it's difficult to quantify. But on the other hand, if we don't find a way to compromise, we face those centralization problems and whatnot. What the real world has of good is that it's really easy to kind of attribute identity to a specific individual, whereas in the digital space, obviously, it's just not there yet. So yeah.
One Black Mirror scenario, which I don't think is that far-fetched, is the cool thing about DAOs is that it makes it super easy to anonymously bundle capital together behind a shared mission and purpose. And one of the coolest DAO, in my opinion, is Ukraine DAO, as they within a few days after the war started in this year, they raised a couple millions of dollars, and are now deploying that for well-being, for providing housing for affected people and so on, very, very good purpose. But what if suddenly this kind of switches and the purpose gets defined more broadly, and suddenly they're not just providing utilities or food or something, but they're actually providing weapons to Ukraine, and say we're now kind of wanting to push the liberalization of Ukraine, and then how far can this go? At some point in time, do we have DAOs that actually fund wars, because it's just so easy to get a lot of anonymous people and pool money behind this purpose, and it's very hard, this can very easily switch over to a bad purpose. Not saying this will happen to Ukraine though.
Yeah, or even the idea of a Twitter brigade with a bunch of money behind it to attack somebody, it can be pretty scary quickly. I agree. Any other negatives or Black Mirror-esque outcomes that you're worried about? No. Cool. So I guess, actually, can I get a quick time check? Sorry, I just want to make sure. How much time do we have left? No worries. Okay, cool. All right. Okay, cool. Just want to make sure. So in terms of innovations, like what are, like Lukas, you mentioned, not forgetting the past and trying to reinvent the wheel, like that's not really going to get us anywhere. What are like practical methodologies that we've seen that get us excited about how DAOs are learning? Like I think, to your point, Reka, on the question of intimacy, like Friends with Benefits recently, they had rolled out this idea of like city level membership, which required fewer tokens, and then it looks like they're trying to scale that back because they weren't able to support that. So this kind of ebb and flow of trying to expand out and learning and then iterating is, I think, really important. Have we seen any other promising developments, like practically speaking, on the DAO innovation side that you're tracking or excited about?
I still kind of have to rephrase what I said, but differently. So what we've been doing for the past, since 2021, where the DAO boom, like where a lot of DAOs were started, they were scaled really fast and lost a lot of the actual valuable work and communication that can be done, because it's really hard to scale that, and I think scaling will be an issue still for the future in multiple directions, not just the communications. And what I've been seeing recently, bear market, or not, I don't know what's doing that, but a lot of communities have started being more exclusive, but in a way that it's not like a financial mechanism that you have to buy yourself into it. Like Friends with Benefits, for example, if you guys don't know, it's a community that started out as like kind of an artist collective and grew into the whole like social crypto narrative. I was also part of that for a long time, still kind of am, but you have to buy yourself in, so you have to purchase a number of tokens, which, the price of that fluctuates. At one point, it was almost $10,000 to be able to participate, which is extremely non-inclusive, but there's a lot of different ways that you can cultivate exclusivity, inclusivity with being exclusive. So not just purchasing assets, but also based on merit, based on reputation, based on interest, and based on contribution. So you can essentially make groups more attainable to go into and scale them slower than what we saw in the last year, because then if you grow too much, too fast, it grows weak, and then communities fall apart, or they have to like restart it from the bottom, which we've seen a lot in the last year. So I would really much see more of this exclusivity, not based strictly on assets, but from some form of other contribution or merit or reputation, which I think there's a lot of that coming up. We do that in our community as well. It's just so hard to set it up. I'm building community infrastructure. I should be able to do this probably the best right now. It's so hard. It's very, very hard to keep inclusivity in mind, not be financialized, and protect the little valuable conversations, small spaces, so that people actually find, if I only want to talk about developer stuff, I find my little developer pocket in the community, and so on. It's really hard to set that up and make it anonymous, trustless, permissionless. So it's a tough cookie, but I'd love to see more of that.
You were numbering the challenges that you are going through when scaling a DAO, and I was just remembering, my past experience with building, my previous company, and the different stages of growth from the company. When we sold, we were 65 people, and the people that were coming in at later stages were definitely different from the ones coming in the beginning. Incentives were so different, like the first one's more eager to experiment, more eager to take risks, and eager to contribute in exchange for ownership. And by ownership, I mean not necessarily capital ownership, but more like the feeling of being part of something new, of building something. And then the later contributors were more like capital driven. They felt like they were not as important as the former ones, just maybe because of the lack of information or the the difficulty of creating connections with existing contributors. But it's really interesting to see we're facing exactly the same challenges, just with different environments. So yeah, it's cool.
And it's super fast. So sometimes the community can grow like 10,000 members in 3 days, and what do you do then? Like, I don't know. Like it's a lot of fixing to do afterwards, and sometimes, yeah, like companies grow, like you individually pick people you want to work with and hire them. I think we should have some form of that within communities still. So like contributors should apply, and then you should talk to them, like see if they actually fit the culture of the community that you've started or the company. And it's the same with DAOs. I think the communication of values, mission, and kind of the culture, the lore is so important. And giving that information actually has to be like a slower learning process than how fast onboarding processes are right now, to avoid this miscommunication and like the segmentation of the community, of the early ones being super eager to just be there and just see where this goes, and a year later the community has a very different feeling, which I think is okay, but then it still has to be aligned with the mission, and people have to know what they're doing there.
Yeah, and I think that's really critical, as when in the beginning you have this intimacy, you're like in the same chat group, you're meeting each other, you know everyone that's part of this group, but as it scales, you lose also this vision, this purpose, and so it's super critical to formalize this as soon as possible, to have it in a way public, in a way kind of formalized, that and also people can decide, is this something I want to rally behind or not just because they've been talking to people in this group, but because they have something that they can point to, and whether you call this like constitution or bylaws or law, it doesn't really matter, just have some artifact that says this is what the DAO does, this is what we are, this is our culture, and I think that there's a couple of good examples out there, like ENS DAO had this quite early on. The Optimism Collective is doing a good job, like having the narrative behind the purpose communicated, and I think that's super critical.
And shout out again to ENS, just randomly switching topic, the token distribution, and me knowing what I'm doing with picking a delegate was so good. I don't think I've seen a better one since then, so I don't know how you guys are going to do it with SAFE, or we did it, I wasn't in it, but if the ENS one was very clear communication. They had a whole interface of, this is your tokens because you get them because you did this, and then this is what's going to happen, this is how governance is going to look like, this is how you can pick your own delegate, who you want to delegate your ENS to, and it was so transparent. I wish we could have more of that. Obviously, that was so much work, so shout out to the team, but at least the common mission and alignment on that should be done similar to this in a smaller scale as well.
Maybe something also to the ENS delegate system, like while it is very good, we also need to be very, like the way ENS, the delegates were set up is that everyone could kind of propose themselves as a delegate, and it was kind of open for all. But in the end, this meant that people that already had a big following, like a Twitter following or whatever, they were influencers, they got a lot of voting power, which is just risky, as you see the same faces in 20 different DAOs having like the majority voting power because they have a lot of Twitter followers, and kind of balancing this with like obviously people that have that can represent people, and that's usually people with a big following, should also be representing the people in the community, but also not just making this a Twitter popularity contest.
To your point, Lukas, you've mentioned, obviously, I think it makes total sense to, give power to people that really deserve it, but being DAOs, by definition, digital, native, open source, permissionless communities, are there any different ways for you to convey knowledge other than PR? Do you see any other ways?
Kind of like these mini courses that reward you for taking them. I've been building those into our community. Takes like 2 minutes to go through what this community is about. Here, have a badge, which is not financialized yet. Probably people will find a way to financialize that, I don't know. But so you can embed these like smaller educational pieces into the flow, into the community. I agree, it's really hard. There's a meme that's going around in the community right now that every company turns into a media company at some point, which I agree with, because
It's so true.
so true. So you can hire more PR people if you want to go big. But
I mean, community managers are the new devs.
yeah, it's a change of the scenery. But so communicating that actually, obviously publicly is very important. We actually agreed before in this panel that you have to communicate your mission really well and not get lost in the noise of like just publishing other information about the community. But within the community and in other ways, kind of incentivized education or incentivized kind of like this quest to get into the community is super interesting, which kind of solves that, I think, for now. We'll see what the drawback of that might be, but for now it works pretty well. So.
And maybe one thing we've been doing with SafeDAO is that we also had a way for everyone to promote themselves as a delegate, but they had to really write down, like, this is my prior contributions to the project, and this should be something that's provable, that's public, and only people that had a provable record of contributions were then official delegates. It remains to be seen, like time will tell if this is the right approach, but at least it made a little bit of like a filter of, these are actually people that are interested in projects, they have some knowledge, and then afterwards we still had this way for people to delegate their votes, so there was some kind of popularity element as part of that, but it kind of restricts who can be part of this group in the first place. And maybe with some more mechanisms that also show contributions more publicly, that we can, if it's badges or some other ways to track contributions that then have an impact on your position in the DAO, might also help there, not just being kind of a pure delegation scheme that's then popularity based.
I really like that idea, actually. Not only it kind of creates the right environment for the most knowledgeable people to kind of take power in from the entire community, but also incentivizes newcomers to contribute proactively, just because they know for a fact that there's a possibility in the future that if they keep doing good for the community, they will receive more responsibility. And I was thinking on ways in which you can create this incentive line continuous, so to speak. So the more you contribute, the more you earn. Back in the day when I was thinking on kind of incorporating the first company, I brought up a memorandum of incorporation that really tried to use the legal frame in Portugal to do stuff like that. So the corporation would create itself, owing the 100% of its shares, and then with the time and with you contributing and people contributing, we'd have these committees where we would decide, okay, you made this contribution, we're going to have these distribution cycles, and you represent like 10% of the value created within this cycle, so you should earn like 10% of this stake that is to be distributed in this cycle. Obviously, my lawyers, weren't able to cope up with the legal framework in Portugal, so it was just an idea that's still in time.
On that note, I think you all are very knowledgeable and have seen, a lot across the space. Maybe a little bit of alpha time. Reka, you and I were talking about the idea of just like a CRM for DAOs and for understanding, like how these relationships are built and like tracking those things. What needs to be built? Like, what are you all itching for a builder or an investor in the audience to go out and build right now?
There's so many things, oh my goodness. I have a very long list, but two things that I really want today or yesterday is a better CRM, which is incorporating the fact that we use so many platforms, so DMs are scattered, but also that there's multiple people on the team that I have to like share information with. That is a really cool one. And the other one is there's really terrible publishing tools right now. And my friend LDF and I were just experimenting with co-creation and co-publishing in Web3. So as media is going to be more important for, like communications as a whole are super important, it's not just dev time anymore. It's so terrible. Like if I want to co-publish Anyway, not keep the answer long, so publishing has to be amped up. So anything around that creator-focused tooling is super interesting.
Maybe in general, just communication. Like I want to see more better communication tools. Like Discord is great, but I try to not spend as much time in Discord. Or like as soon as you have multiple communities that you're involved in, it just gets unmanageable. And having some more DAO-native communication tools, whether that's communication within the DAO, having some like sub-DAO structures kind of as part of this, or also communication as a DAO to externally, so representing the voice of a community as in text, not just like transactions. That's interesting. And another part I would like to see is more innovation around optimistic governance. So giving responsibility to others, but then have some ways to kind of intervene if this responsibility is abused. Kapatki is using a tool based on SAFE that kind of you can give the entire treasury to someone else, but it defines exactly what the treasury can do. So you kind of restrict on certain protocols or certain interactions, and then you can also cut the cords at any point of time or intervene. And I think this just enables then this modularization of a DAO and go away from this monolithic DAO where every decision has to go through like a community vote.
I was touching exactly that point on execution automation. You know, if you go to any specific DAO and then we go through the forum and then there's this process where you put a proposal and then the proposal gets most probably on this off-chain voting environment such as a snapshot or something, and then the proposal gets approved, and then it's not 100% certain that it's got to be enforced or executed, whatever it is, just because there's multiple spectrums of decision happening, and most of them aren't executed automatically just because there's not a connection, real connection between, you know, real world and the digital world. You know, examples of those are like, okay, let's propose a grant for this team, it's 100K. Okay, vote yes. Okay, then what? What happens then? Okay, somebody has to take the funds out and then has to transfer the funds out to the team's wallet and whatnot. We're actually, you know, Lukas mentioned like one of the cool things that we're trying to, you know, come up with using SAFE's infrastructure in Zodiacs more concretely, is ways in which we can codify the parameters upon which a specific set of transactions should be enforced upon a decision on a snapshot, for instance. So we use like this Oracle, and the Oracle is going to kind of sweep all the proposals and is going to enforce or execute a specific transaction with a set of, with presets pre-approved by the community that are going to execute a transaction. And that's where I'm most excited, you know, to have this automation end-to-end execution, because that's what we want to see, you know, moving forward on a decentralized autonomous organization, right? It's its ability to kind of execute decisions, not, you know, not only to have the interfaces for people to vote on something, but also to have necessary consequences on such votings. So yeah.
Maybe check out Superfluid too.
Superfluid?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I got the countdown. Is that? Yep. Okay, cool. So thank you all for your time. I think there's a lot to be excited about for the future of DAOs. So thank you all for listening. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Those were brilliant.